I was standing on the edge of the dispersal strip at Lechfeld Air Base, Bavaria, on the 12th of May 1945, when the engines finally stopped. Not temporarily. Not between sorties. Stopped for good. The war in Europe had been over for 4 days. The airfield was still crowded with P-51 Mustangs, their bare aluminum skins streaked with oil and exhaust, invasion stripes already painted over in uneven gray. Some still carried nose art. Some had fresh bullet patches. Others were almost factory clean, flown in too late to ever escort a bomber. They all looked the same once the propellers stopped. I had been with the 357th Fighter Group, 9th Air Force, since early 1944. I wasn't a pilot. I was an engineering officer, responsible for keeping Packard-built V1650-7 Merlin engines running in weather they were never designed for: English rain, French mud, German dust. During the war, the Mustang never rested. After the war, it had nowhere to go. In May and June 1945, our work changed completely. We were no longer fixing battle damage. We were preparing aircraft for storage, transfer, or destruction. That last word wasn't spoken much. But everyone understood it. The USAAF had more than 8,000 P-51s by the end of the war. Europe didn't need them. The Pacific was already winding down. Jet aircraft, the P-80 Shooting Star, were being talked about openly now, no longer secret. The Mustang had won the air war over Germany. And that, ironically, made it obsolete. We drained fuel tanks. We fogged engines with preservative oil. We sealed intakes with canvas and tape. Control surfaces were locked. Guns were removed. The 6.50 caliber Browning M2s that had once defined the aircraft were stacked in crates like scrap metal. Some Mustangs were flown to collection points in France. Others were handed over to the British. A few were allocated to foreign air forces that barely existed yet: Italy, Sweden, Switzerland. Most were simply parked, row after row, wingtip to wingtip, engines silent. I remember walking between them early in the morning, the aluminum skins cold enough to burn your fingers. There was no noise anymore. No radio chatter. No scramble bells. Just wind moving through empty cockpits. Pilots disappeared first. They were rotated home, reassigned, or discharged. Many of them never wanted to see an airplane again. Ground crews like me stayed longer. Someone had to inventory everything. Someone had to decide which aircraft were worth saving. By August 1945, after Japan surrendered, the decision was final. The war was over everywhere. And the Mustang had survived it, which made it a problem. In 1946, the USAAF began its massive drawdown. Bases closed. Units dissolved. Aircraft were sold off for $1,200 apiece, sometimes less. I saw Mustangs stripped of radios and instruments, their wings cut with torches so they couldn't be flown again. The first time I watched one being broken apart, I felt nothing. That worried me more than grief would have. We told ourselves it was just metal, just an airframe. But we had trusted our lives to those machines. And now they were being reduced to raw aluminum. When the United States Air Force became a separate service in September 1947, the Mustang was redesignated F-51. By then, it was no longer considered a frontline fighter. It was assigned to Air National Guard units, reserve squadrons, training commands, and foreign military aid programs. Jets were faster, higher, cleaner. But jets couldn't loiter. Jets couldn't operate from broken strips. Jets couldn't carry the same kind of punishment. No one was thinking about that yet. We thought the Mustang story was over. We were wrong. After 1947, my paperwork changed, but my job didn't. The insignia on the hangars said USAF now, not USAAF. The uniforms were updated. The language shifted. Everything was about the future: speed, altitude, jets. We were told repeatedly that piston engine fighters belonged to the past. The F-51 Mustang was officially classified as obsolete. In practice, it was everywhere. I was reassigned stateside, rotating between Air National Guard bases in the Midwest and South. Places like Selfridge, Bergstrom, Dobbins. Former wartime pilots, now weekend warriors, flew Mustangs with peacetime discipline and wartime muscle memory. The aircraft were no longer polished combat machines. Paint peeled. Wiring aged. Spare parts became difficult to source. The Merlin engines were still temperamental. They always had been. High performance. Tight tolerances. Unforgiving of neglect. But the airframes held together. The jets arrived, F-80 shooting stars mostly, and immediately began failing in ways the brochures never mentioned. Short range. Fragile engines. Long, clean runways required. In the real world, outside California and Nevada test fields, they struggled. We didn't say it out loud, but among maintenance officers the feeling was shared. The future wasn't ready yet. In 1949, I attended a briefing at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The subject was logistics planning for a limited conflict scenario in East Asia. Korea was mentioned briefly, almost as an academic exercise. No one expected it to matter. By early 1950, the F-51 inventory had shrunk further. Many aircraft had been sold abroad: Sweden, Italy, Israel, Australia. Others were mothballed in the desert at Davis-Monthan, aluminum skins bleaching under the Arizona sun. And then, on the 25th of June 1950, the North Korean People's Army crossed the 38th parallel. Within days, the situation collapsed faster than anyone predicted. The United States Far East Air Forces had jets, F-80s, based in Japan. But Korea didn't have jet runways. It had dirt strips, shell craters, and roads barely wide enough for trucks. The shooting stars couldn't reach the battlefield with meaningful time on station. The Mustang could. By July 1950, emergency orders went out. Every flyable F-51 was to be reactivated, refurbished, and shipped west. Air National Guard units were stripped almost overnight. Aircraft pulled from storage were inspected, patched, and ferried across the Pacific. I followed them. When I arrived at Itazuke Air Base, Japan, in early July, the atmosphere felt eerily familiar: rushed, underplanned, improvisational. It reminded me of England in early 1944, before Normandy. But this time, the enemy wasn't Luftwaffe fighters. It was tanks. The Mustang was never designed for close air support. Its liquid-cooled engine made it vulnerable to ground fire. A single rifle round through a coolant line could bring it down in minutes. We knew that. We flew them anyway. The aircraft were redesignated again in paperwork, F-51D, but nothing about them was modernized in spirit. They carried 5-inch Havar rockets, 500-pound general-purpose bombs, napalm tanks, crude and terrifying. Pilots were warned not to linger. Hit fast. Pull out low. Don't circle. They did it anyway. I saw Mustangs come back with holes punched clean through their wings. I saw oil streaks along fuselages where engines had been shut down seconds after landing. Some never made it back at all. The pilots weren't young men anymore. Many were veterans recalled from civilian life. They remembered the Mustang as an escort fighter, high, fast, confident. Korea stripped that illusion quickly. The aircraft that had once ruled the skies over Germany was now flying below ridgelines, hunting trucks and infantry columns, dodging machine gun fire from villages whose names no one could pronounce correctly. The losses were heavy. By August 1950, it was clear the Mustang was paying in blood for the Air Force's lack of preparation. Jets still couldn't do the job. The Mustang could, but it wasn't meant to survive it for long. I stood beside the runway at Daegu one evening and watched a damaged F-51 roll to a stop, coolant streaming from the nose. The pilot climbed out slowly, his flight suit dark with sweat. He didn't say anything. He just leaned against the wing and stared at the aircraft, like he was looking at an old friend who had been asked to do too much. The Mustang had been given a second war, and it was aging fast. By August 1950, the war had settled into something worse than chaos. The front was no longer moving forward. It was collapsing backward. The perimeter around Busan tightened day by day, and the Mustang squadrons were flying until the aircraft and the men were worn thin. The F-51 had become the backbone of close air support, not because it was ideal, but because nothing else could do the job. Jets were fast. Too fast. They passed over targets before ground controllers could even finish speaking. They burned fuel at a rate that left them minutes, not hours, over the battlefield. And when weather closed in, which it often did, they were grounded completely. The Mustang flew anyway. From Daegu, Pohang, and later Busan East, F-51s launched at dawn, often returning with empty ammo belts and scorched pylons. The ground crews worked in mud and heat, loading rockets by hand, fitting napalm tanks that leaked and stank. The pilots learned to fly lower than doctrine allowed. Treetop level, valley floors, roads. I read every loss report as it came in. They were clinical documents, time, location, probable cause. But patterns emerged quickly. Hit by small arms fire. Engine failure after ground fire. Did not return from sortie. The Mustang's liquid-cooled Merlin was its greatest weakness now. Unlike radial engines, it could not absorb punishment. A single bullet could end the flight. We began modifying procedures quietly. Extra armor where possible. Warnings issued that pilots pretended not to hear. Everyone understood the trade-off. Stay high and be ineffective, or go low and maybe not come back. By September 1950, casualties among F-51 units were higher than anyone wanted to admit publicly. The aircraft that had once escorted bombers safely across Germany was now bleeding out over rice paddies and mountain roads. Then came Incheon. On the 15th of September 1950, MacArthur's Landing changed the shape of the war almost overnight. North Korean supply lines collapsed. Columns fled north. The Mustang squadrons were suddenly hunting moving targets again: trucks, artillery, retreating infantry. The aircraft performed brutally well. But success didn't feel clean. I watched pilots return visibly shaken, not from air combat, but from what they had seen below. Low-level war leaves no distance. No abstraction. By November, the optimism vanished again. Chinese forces entered the war in overwhelming numbers. The weather turned against us. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Fuel thickened. Metal cracked. Hydraulic lines failed without warning. The Mustang, designed for temperate European skies, flew in conditions that punished every system. Engines seized on startup. Canopies froze shut. Ground crews worked with numb hands, fingers splitting open under gloves. Losses increased again. By January 1951, the writing was on the wall. The Mustang could still fight, but it could not endure forever. Jets were improving. New types were arriving. Runways were being extended. Doctrine was catching up with reality. The F-51 had bought time. And time, in war, is paid for in lives. I began to see fewer Mustangs on the flight line. Each absence was noticed. Each empty space felt permanent. The aircraft was still there, but it was slowly being pushed aside. Not with ceremony. With exhaustion. By early 1951, the war had settled into a rhythm that ground everything down. There were no breakthroughs anymore. No sweeping movements. The front shifted a few miles north or south, then stopped again. What remained was attrition, slow, methodical, and expensive. The F-51 Mustang was no longer the center of attention, but it was still there, flying every day. Jets were finally beginning to take over parts of the mission. The F-84 Thunderjet arrived in increasing numbers. It could carry bombs, survive ground fire better than the Mustang, and its jet engine, for all its problems, was not vulnerable in the same way as a liquid-cooled Merlin. But the Thunderjet needed long runways, good weather, careful planning. The Mustang needed very little. So it stayed. By mid-1951, many F-51 squadrons were operating aircraft that had logged thousands of hours, some since 1944. The fatigue was visible everywhere. Cracked skin panels, warped mounts, wiring held together with experience rather than confidence. The men flying them were just as worn. Pilots rotated home, replaced by others who quickly learned the same habits: flying too low, staying too long, trusting the airplane more than doctrine allowed. Ground crews learned to stop asking how an aircraft had survived and focus instead on whether it could fly again tomorrow. Sometimes the answer was no. The Mustang's role narrowed. It became a daylight attacker, used when weather allowed and jets were unavailable. It flew armed reconnaissance, rail strikes, road interdiction. The work was repetitive, dangerous, and rarely visible to anyone outside the unit. Losses continued, though fewer were reported in detail. By then, everyone understood the risks. There was no mystery left in the casualty lists. By 1952, the Mustang's presence on the Korean peninsula was thinning. Units converted to jets as soon as they could. Remaining F-51s were concentrated where nothing else could operate: forward strips, damaged fields, emergency deployments. I spent more time filling out transfer paperwork than maintenance logs. Aircraft were ferried south, then west. Some went to allies. Some were broken down for parts. A few were simply parked, engines sealed one last time. The war dragged on. Armistice talks stalled and resumed and stalled again. The flying never stopped, but it felt disconnected from any sense of progress. On the 27th of July, 1953, the armistice was signed. There was no celebration on the flight line. The Mustangs did not fly that day. They sat in the heat, canopies open, metal ticking softly as it cooled. Aircraft that had survived 2 wars were finally still. In the weeks that followed, the orders were clear. The F-51 would not be part of the post-war force structure. Jets had taken its place completely now. This time, there would be no return. The Mustang's combat career was over. What remained was cleanup, inventory, disposal, reassignment, the quiet work that follows every war. I walked past the last F-51 assigned to our unit before it was ferried away. The paint was faded, the nose art barely visible. The logbook showed service entries stretching back almost a decade. It had outlived expectations. So had we. After July 1953, there was no urgency anymore. That was the strangest part. For almost 10 years, every decision involving the Mustang had been made under pressure: weather closing in, fuel running low, men waiting on the ground. Now the aircraft was no longer needed, and nothing replaced that sense of necessity. The F-51 disappeared quietly. Some airframes were flown to storage fields in the United States. Davis-Monthan, Kingman, places where the desert preserved what war had not destroyed. Rows of Mustangs sat with engines sealed, tires deflating slowly, dust settling into every seam. Others were transferred abroad. By the mid-1950s, former American Mustangs flew with foreign markings in Latin America, in parts of Asia, in air forces that lacked jets or could not maintain them. The aircraft adapted easily. It always had. Simpler runways, shorter supply chains, familiar mechanics. A few were sold to civilians. I saw one at an airfield in California in 1956, stripped of weapons, polished to a shine that would have looked obscene in Korea. The engine note was the same. The airframe was the same. But the purpose was gone. I stood there longer than I meant to. In official history, the Mustang is remembered for 1944-45, long-range escort, the defeat of the Luftwaffe, aluminum wings over Europe. Korea is mentioned briefly, if at all. A footnote. For those of us who stayed with it, the order was reversed. Europe felt distant, controlled, clean, in memory. Korea was where the airplane aged, where it broke, where it paid for being available when nothing else was. By the late 1950s, the paperwork stopped crossing my desk. No more engine logs. No more transfer orders. The Mustang had finally left the system entirely. It didn't end with a ceremony. It ended with a line item removed from a list. I sometimes think about the first day after the war in 1945, standing among silent aircraft in Germany, believing that chapter was closed. We didn't understand then that some machines don't belong to one war alone. The P-51 Mustang didn't survive because it was perfect. It survived because it could be used again, even when it shouldn't have been. When its last engine cooled, there was no applause. Just absence, and the knowledge that something which had once kept men alive by flying higher and faster than anything else had finally been asked to do too much, and had done it anyway. That is what happened to the Mustang after the war. Not legend. Service.